Well, good afternoon, investors. Welcome back for those of you that are returning, to our January 14th edition of Bull Sessions. My name is Mark Robertson. I'm joined here by my dear friend and colleague, Ken Cavola. Good afternoon, Ken.
Good afternoon, Mark. It's a beautiful, beautiful sunny day here, but we have snow coming down and it's under 20, so I'm glad to be inside and warm.
Well, I'll tell you, I looked out there and saw that orb in the sky, and it's actually a trap because it looks like it's about 60 degrees out
It,
there, and it's not.
it does look like you could go out and sunbathe in that white stuff, yes.
It does. We're also joined here by one of Houston's finest, Matt Spielman. Good afternoon, Matt.
Good afternoon.
And sneaking into the back room today, filling in for Kim Butcher, Kevin Galogly. Good afternoon, Kevin.
Good afternoon. I'm doing this rather than actually preparing for my stock presentation for tomorrow night's meeting. Matt, you'll love it. It's green brick. It's green brick.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. All right, we're going to cover three main areas today. First of all, we're going to tease a little bit about forecasting. Then we're going to spend some time talking about something we stumbled onto at Seeking Alpha recently, and that led to the topic of momentum. So we're going to be playful and take a look at that. And then we're also going to take a look at the Buttonwood portfolio. So those are the three pieces. Ken, anything you want to add?
No, except that one of my sources for the Buttonwood stock that we're going to add is in the audience today. So Barbara, I'm talking about you, so I'm shouting out to you. Listen carefully when you hear what I'm going to suggest we add to the Buttonwood portfolio, okay?
Good stuff. All right, let's go ahead and get underway. Here is our traditional slide. Ken, I think we need to put the Highland Cow Carnival onto our calendars. Mark your calendar for that. I just think it's a festive picture.
Interesting looking beasts, aren't they?
They certainly are. And the image on the lower left comes courtesy of George Mackey, who was out on the highways this past week and weekend charting Buc-ee's locations. And the subject of renaming the Gulf of Mexico came up, and I think George liked this idea. So going to rename it something, why not? And last but not least, Portillo's is not a sponsor of this session, but they should be. And yes, Kevin, Portillo's was up 18% at one point today. Go ahead, ask the question.
You already know the answer. Have you made what's your cost basis and what is it trading at right now?
I don't remember and I don't know.
And there's no dividend, which means you're losing money.
Okay, next slide, Mark. Next slide.
No intention to find out.
All right, moving on from the pain, here is our standard disclaimer. Most of you have been here before. Most of you are very familiar with the disclaimer, but there may be a couple new people in the audience. No investment recommendation is intended. This is entirely about education and basically a demonstration of some methodologies, techniques, principles, and philosophies that have worked very well for the modern investment club movement. Most of the people here in the room with you today are members of investment clubs or are very familiar with the process of discovering opportunities, analyzing those opportunities, and building effective and successful portfolios. That's what we're here to talk about. Do your own homework before making any decision about any particular stock. If we own something, we'll try to remember to disclose that, but please recognize that it's up to you to learn, share ideas with friends, but the rest of it is up to you. Our two email addresses are down at the bottom if you want copies of the slides or if you have follow-up topics or questions. Anything else, Ken?
Nope, sounds good to me.
And I do want to tell Cheryl, I haven't forgotten her, we are going to go back and look at the historical proof for cognitive technology. Just didn't get there yet. Just got distracted. Life gets in the way. But we will. Don't give up on us, Cheryl. All right, here's a quick look at the groundhog. And for the first time in a very long time, Jim Gallagher does not have $1 million lead. So that's kind of interesting. He actually peaked at about 3.3 million a few months ago, but he's still way ahead. I think he's comfortable, but a pretty good showing from top to bottom. I am falling rapidly in the ranks.
Mark, can you remember the last time we had two people that were close to 100% return?
It's been a few years. We've had it in the past, for sure.
Okay, because I can't remember in the last 4 or 5 years when we've had not only one but two people that are almost at 100%. So,
Well,
or better than 100%. Yeah.
a couple years ago, there was actually red ink on this leaderboard. So, I mean, that just shows you how different it is. So, good stuff. I mean, the clubs are representing themselves well. Basically, 7 of the top 20 are investment clubs or groups of individuals investing together. And let's see, Sean is still on here at 32nd. Kim is really close. She's been bouncing around the low 40s. She's still at 51st. I have slid back to oblivion. Ken, you're kind of hanging out there.
I'm just in the mediocre range right now. So,
And Kevin is still doing lousy, but at least he's beating the value line arithmetic average, and I'm not. And Matt continues to hover right around that $1 million starting point. I think he's just collecting all of his strength and energy for a final push.
Indeed. I got a chair for you down here when you finally get the basement part. There's plenty of open seating.
We still want to point out that value line arithmetic average is even deeper into the toilet than it has been. It's just an amazing difference. Typically, that value line arithmetic average leads the Wilshire 5000, and thanks to the Magnificent Seven and other things going on with some of the larger market cap stocks, that's a substantial difference. It might be the biggest I've ever seen, but I will go back and check that. Good stuff. Let's keep pressing on. Here's a little bit of a moment, just kind of teasing at the. We do this every year or so, and right around the time we all give up on our New Year's resolutions, we remind ourselves of this. And you can all read them. I don't know if I have a favorite other than that last one is a legitimate moment in time. An answer to an audience attendee at a national convention that asked me if I would consider investing in Google. It's approximately 25 years ago, and you can see my answer. So I think it belongs up here. Not quite as famous as the other people on this list, but
maybe a corollary to that might be, why would Google ever get into autonomous vehicles other than some kind of whim or something else? The truth is that your daily commute, if you count going there and back, is one of the largest uninterrupted times that you're not surfing the internet or using the tools, as long as they don't invade your sleep.
Interesting. Well, I suspect this.
Mark, I'm kind of surprised there isn't a quote right after this about how to bet the house on Portillo's.
That'll come in a few years.
They were two separate instances. I thought they were one and the same.
Oh, they weren't.
Don't put your money in Google. Put your money in Portillo's.
Hey, if you're going to get ugly, we'll talk McDonald's. 1969.
You never miss an opportunity. Go for it.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about forecasting a little bit. Here's our weekly look at the stock market. It has been kind of in the doldrums for the last 2 or 3 weeks. This is the stock market as represented by the value line arithmetic average, which again is about 1,700 companies, including the S&P 500, 400, 600, and a few other smaller, medium-sized companies. So 1,700 companies in all. We do use it to characterize the market because we believe in tracking all of the above investing and investing in a blend of small, medium, and large companies over time. The forecasts right now are in that 8 to 9, let's call it 9% range right now, and they're right on top of each other, in fact. And you can see that green bar on the far right has sagged beneath that long-term regression line. So things are getting a little bit easier to go shopping, and value line was a little bit ahead of everybody else on this one, going back to 45%. But any thoughts here, Ken?
I I just like it when I can see value line and manifest and the proved numbers, all of them basically aligning with each other. That just kind of tells me that I'm using a group of ideas that probably makes some sense. That's all.
All right, we're going to return and talk about forecasting here in a minute, but thought we would have a tiny bit of fun. Barry Ritholtz every year puts out a dissertation on what everybody predicted last year and how well they did. And it's pretty much the same picture every year. And you can see here that the market checked in near 6,000 at the end of the year, and you can see all of the predictions. Some of those adjusted as late as October, by the way, which is kind of interesting that they're allowed to do that. But his theme is nobody knows anything. And what is the value in these? And I will tell you, Ken, every time an article about somebody making their 2025 year-end forecast comes across my email, it now just gets deleted. You know, I'd rather not waste the time.
Well, I can't remember a year, Mark, when they've come even, quote, very close, unquote. I think that my experience with this over my years of investing has always been that they're overshooting, undershooting, or they have such a wide variety of numbers that it doesn't make any sense to look at any individual number anyway. So.
The other thing I'd say is the direction of these, right? So, I mean, they didn't go right on January 1st, but January 15th, S&P was at 47.72. So some of these were, even looking at large scale, some of those were down rather than up.
Yep. Wild stuff. And then here, Ken, this next one kind of makes the point you were just saying. They're kind of all over the map. And that's just a bunch of the major institutions, major rhinos, with their predictions over time. And it's a little bit hard to see. It's a little bit faded. Not my slide, not my fault, but the actual return is in virtually every year outside even the highs and lows of those predictions. It's an amazing slide when you think about it.
It's reverse banding. It's a control engineer's worst nightmare.
It
Well,
is.
my eye immediately went to the years where the actual return beat everybody else, but I was kind of ignoring the years where the actual return lost to everybody else. There's quite a few of those too for what is this, maybe a 15-year period, 20-year period. That's not even 10-year period maybe.
Yeah.
To have three of them where the actual return is on the other direction, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about 2022 in particular with respect to the seeking alpha stuff. So interesting year. And I think it's kind of faded from most of our memories. It was more painful than I remembered it being when I went back and looked. So
I find it kind of interesting that of the 10 years on that one, the only one where it's right in the middle is 2020. So a global pandemic, it's right. Actually, it looks like 2016 as well. But I mean, 16 and 20, they're right. All the rest, no.
interesting. All right.
Mark, what's going on in 2015 to cluster them so closely together? I mean, you don't see that clustering going on anywhere else on the graph, and yet in 2016, everybody seems to be saying pretty much the same thing. And I guess in I said 16, I meant 15, and in 2017 they're all clustered together again. This time the actual is way above, but I guess I should go back and remind myself what was happening historically at that time too.
I wouldn't work at it too hard. They were probably just all going to the same bar to make their predictions on the napkins, and then they after COVID they ended up at different bars, so they couldn't cheat off each other's homework. So I didn't say that. Nobody turned me in. Well, our friend Tom Lee actually he's not on this page back here, by the way, or here, by the way, but he actually nailed it pretty well. And kind of speaks for itself. And he's a little more optimistic about 2025 going ahead. Maybe I'm an overly optimistic optimist, but or easy to sway when it comes to this kind of thing. But I feel better that he has pretty high projections for this coming year. And Ken, is he on CNBC every day now, or is it just a couple times a week?
He's on a couple times a week. He's not on every day, but he is on a couple times a week, and they're giving him more and more time. I like that because I like to listen to what he has to say.
And he continues to like the smaller, faster growing companies. So good thing.
I do appreciate, Mark, the emphasis that he's placing on financials and industrials as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's highlighting some places where a lot of better investing portfolios, a lot of growth in portfolios have neglected those two sectors quite a bit in some cases. And I think there's some really good ideas in both of those sectors that maybe you need to take a second look at sometimes.
Yeah, and he does continue to favor Bitcoin for the long term. I find that interesting. And he's been out front and very transparent about his beliefs about various aspects of that. So he's not afraid to be different. Well, Ken, here's your slide. Basically going and taking the one that we looked at last week. I cleaned it up and moved the red and green around a little bit just to show the propensity for an individual year to come in the green. And then the resulting look at, again, we looked, I think, at 10-year rolling averages last week or the week before. This is just 4 years down the center. And I know this is one of your favorite themes, Ken.
It is. And we've done charts like this for 3 year, for 5 year, for 10 year. We've done many charts like this, and I think each one of them is just confirming the idea that long-term investors, long-term people that are in the market and that stay in the market, that don't change their mind every week or every day or every couple of hours, I think that they stand to put together a nest egg that they can rely on as they move into retirement. I mean, good solid 10% growth over a long period of time will give people enough to retire on if they're starting with as little as $5,000 or $6,000 in their early 20s. So I think that it's a very interesting kind of exercise to play with, and I've been playing with this exercise using different indexes, different numbers. I've been using the S&P. I've been playing around with the equal weighted market indexes to see what happens there.
Mm-hmm.
We're having a discussion in one of our investment clubs, Mark, about whether or not the equal weighted index isn't a better benchmark for us to use than the VFINX, which is the S&P index, or the VT, I think it's VTSMX. Is that the total stock market?
That's
one?
the Wilshire. That's the Wilshire 5000.
We've been looking at an index called the equal weighted index, which mimics a lot more the way we invest.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe comparing what we're doing to that index rather than to the very large company index like the S&P or the huge index, which is dominated, VTSMX is dominated by a dozen stocks. So even though it's the total stock market, it's dominated by those large mega cap stocks at the top of the market.
Yep.
So you can play all kinds of games with statistics, and some of us find it enjoyable and relaxing to do that. But these kind of graphs also tell a very compelling story to investors.
Yeah, a couple warnings there. And first of all, I'm going to head off some emails so you guys can stop typing. This is the Value Line Arithmetic Index. This number here for 2024, if it were the S&P 500, would be in this stack. It came in at 23%. So Make sure you make that distinction. Again, it goes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about the value line arithmetic index lagging. So the comparison right now is easier. The one caution I would have about what you just said, Ken, is over the very long term, that one's actually a tougher comp to keep up with over the very long term. If you look at the work of Clunin and Nicholson on the equally weighted index. So having some fun. Here's a look at that chart over. It's the same information, only now just looking at it rolling over 4-year periods. And there's that one moment in 2008 where the 4-year trailing annualized total return dipped down into negative territory. That discouraged a lot of people, just point blank. So did what happened at the turn of the century and the lost decade. And I believe we are still recovering from that for people that were around long enough to remember that period.
Well, Mark, I'm old enough to remember "Don't trust anybody over 30" at some point in my life, and now I'm old enough to remember "Don't trust anybody that wasn't working" in 2008. You know, so. Especially if they're a commentator for one of the financial institutions or channels. So I really think that what happened in 2008 and the ability to recover from that horrific period of time, I really think that has injured the psyche of many of our younger financial analysts to the point where they're always trying to put insurance on for that kind of an event.
Precisely.
And when they hear the R word, they're always thinking of that kind of an event. And you and I know that you can sometimes glide by a recession and not even know it occurred until they tell you that it happened in hindsight. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're not all like 2008, folks. We don't have to always be on guard against 2008, and it was possible to recover from that event, which was one of the worst events in stock market history.
Yeah, don't forget the words of Warren Buffett at the time. He said, "I hope to live long enough to see another one of these, only I hope I have a little bit more cash at the ready the next time around." He had a lot, but if that were to hit today, he has a whole lot of cash.
Mark, I think if we were to take a poll of investors that were investing prior to 2008 and into 2008, we would find that some of their best purchases were happening at the end of 2008 into 2009.
Oh,
Some
without
of
question.
the biggest home runs they've ever hit were happening right then, and those are carrying the portfolios of today in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. Good stuff. All right. And then we'll close with one last slide because I think it basically brings home this theme of forecasting, which we really don't do, believe it or not. This is a look at the value line, that same equal weighted index, the annualized appreciation, actual versus forecast. Now, I know this is a busy chart, gives me a headache every time I pull it up, but what you want to think of it as, the red is basically what the forecasts of, think of it as a stack of 1,500 stock selection guides if you're an NAIC member or an investment club member. And over time, basically looking at the average of those, what are the average forecasts? That's what the red line represents. That's what we graph every week when we pull up that market slide. And 4 years ago, it projected a 6.8% return for this particular index. Well, the results just came in a little bit under it, but what I think this really shows you is a fairly tight correlation, with an exception of that period we were just talking about. I mean, there's a lot of difference here, I think. This was a time when a lot of people were confused about what was happening in the market. But outside of that period there, pretty good correlation from left to right.
Well, and we have that real brief period of undue disruption because of the pandemic in 2019. That's what you're looking at in 2019. There is the pandemic, but it was you can't even call it parabolic. What do you call it? Spear shaped. You know, is way down and right back up again. So
what this basically suggests, again, we often say how The better investing methodology is joined at the hip with Value Line. They just do it slightly differently, but it really does work, and it simply does. And what I mean by when we do a stock study, and in fact, Arnold Bernard, the founder of Value Line, dedicates a chapter in his book. I'm going to go back and reread it, book that he wrote back in 1958, where he talks about it's not really forecasting so much as characterizing the condition and what you expect, your expectations for the company in the future. And when we do a stock study, the way I think of it is deploying imagination. It's the things that we put down on the paper, the things that we come to deem, I'm going to use your word, Ken, reasonable. A reasonable future for the company you're studying, then what would the company be reasonably worth in the future? And that's what we do time and time again. Every single case study is basically that effort. So it's a form of, I refer to it as trend regression. You'll hear the term regression to the mean. I don't think we do that. But I think what we do is establish reasonable trends for our companies that we study, and then generally expect the performance to approach that trend over time, the imagined results. So I'll get off my soapbox now, Ken. What do you think?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, Mark, about all the times that we urge the people that listen to us to imagine and to think about what might be going on, rather than just plugging in 100 different numbers and coming up with some number that's going to tell you what happens. I think the mind is still the best computer out there. It's still the best AI that we have available. And it's not even artificial. It's yours. It's yours to work with. I mean, from our slides that talk about Warren Buffett sitting and sipping Diet Coke or Cherry Coke, I guess he sips, and wondering what a company might look like 5 years from now, to us dealing with a stock selection guide, which I know some people try to turn into a black box, try to turn into something where if you only could find the right numbers, then you'd find the right answer, and turning it into a document that says, well, if you imagine this, then here's the results that might happen. But if you imagine this, here's the results that might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And playing games like that, which are much more conducive to finding great stocks to purchase and to hold than just plugging in numbers and trying to read a single value off the bottom of a page. So I'm right with you when I say that thinking about what's going on is what our method is. It's not a forecast per se. It's a logical conclusion to a string of assumptions that you can change at will and come up with other possible conclusions.
Yeah, and I think I would boil it down to be reasonable as you do that, but also be unsurprised by surprises. The rule of five is real, it's valid. 4 out of 5 times you'll probably do okay. 1 out of 5 times when you make a projection, something very unusual and usually negative actually takes place or happens. So keep that in mind. So with
I'll
that,
add one other thing
go
with
ahead,
the latest manual is I like their sentence that they have in there, which is our form is basically a series of educated guesses. And it's the same way you guys have just been talking about it. But, you know, you're just trying to make an educated guess at each of the points along the way.
absolutely.
I would say too, going back to our study of Joel Tillinghast's book, he talks a lot about upside downside, and his perspective is if your intention is to be a long-term stockholder, these aren't possibilities, these are going to happen sometime. So you should be prepared for both the good and the bad at different times as you hold it.
Good point. And I am really prepared for the price of Portillo's stock price to go up.
Next slide.
All right.
Thank you, Ken. You saved me.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about performance. Again, this is our 10-year lagging chart. The companies on here are the 10 most widely followed companies by subscribers at Manifest. You can see Index Central down in the lower third there. And again, these are not companies chosen at random. These are companies most likely followed and mostly owned by all of you out there. So it's kind of neat to see some of these, I would say, more than reasonable returns. Good stuff over the long term. Today, we're going to turn our attention to Seeking Alpha. I used to be a more frequent visitor to Seeking Alpha. I soured on it a little bit a few years ago. I've been kind of tinkering with it here over the last few weeks, and we're going to do a quick case study on something that a number of us have been kicking around. In fact, Matt and I and Kim and a few others actually attended a recent webcast where they unveiled their top 10 selections for 2025, and we want to take a closer look at that. Any comments, Ken?
Yeah, I would just caution if you're watching this and you're trying to take in this slide, that you focus first of all on that performance since column, and notice that one of these things is not like the others, and that relative return up there at the top is a 1-year relative return.
Oh, it's a 3-year. It's 3 years.
I'm sorry, a 3-year relative return
Not
rather
10.
than a 10-year relative return. I just want to point that out. That's all.
Yeah, you always, anytime you're talking about returns over time frames, you have to be careful and really look at the relative return if you're going to be making comparisons. You can see that, in fact, we're going to get into this. 2022 was so bad that the average return for the last 3 years is actually only 7.4%. I think that would surprise many people. So here we go. Here is what got us interested in this. They're doing this article where they talk about their top 10s. They do this in the first week of January every year. I have not gone back prior to 2022 yet. We may still do that, but this is what got our attention. The gentleman who made the presentation had achieved over 100% returns in each of the last 2 years. I found it fascinating, Ken, that when I went looking for a logo or a symbol for momentum, I got the bull, which is the Red Bull beverage bull. Anyhow, so momentum, and you'll see why our attention was drawn to that as we walk through this discussion. Here is Stephen Kress. You can read his bio. Basically, he has served in a number of professional positions that involve stock selection analysis and portfolio management. And he sounded like a pretty reasonable guy. He likes data, so most of us here like that. And he is constantly trying to simplify. We also like that. So again, over 30 years of doing this, those last 2 years, first thing that Ken said to me when I mentioned this graph was, well, what about 2022 and are they cherry picking? That's a reasonable skepticism, Ken. I'm not holding that against you. And here is basically the intro slide for the top 10 stocks for 2025. And I think he captures the spirit fairly well. What I would draw the audience's attention to is the fact that he does focus pretty heavily on some of the same factors that we do, growth, value, and profitability. And then as we discovered, they've got a huge component of momentum. And that's what we want to talk about. So here's the 125% mentioned. And Celestica is one that we have tracked fairly carefully. By the way, Modine is the first company I wrote about when I joined the Better Investing staff back in the mid-1990s. So interesting. And AppLovin I really don't know much about, but it obviously had a pretty good year. And
well, I think we should say that we should mention that this is definitely not a long-term stock strategy that we're looking at right now. This is a 1-year strategy where he's going to change these stocks for the next year and the next year after that. So it's much more akin to our small company list than it is to any kind of portfolio we might put together or any kind of long-term thing that we look at. And in a list of 10, a 713% certainly can I don't want to say luck, because you had to find that stock to begin with, and you had to have the courage of your convictions to place it on the list. But I've watched a lot of one-year contests, and I've seen a lot of people that are much better at those contests than some of the better investors happen to be. Because I think that a lot of the folks that are true investors can't get away from this idea that they're not buying for 1 year.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm still approaching all of this with a huge amount of skepticism. I like the idea that he's giving me names, and they're names that I can look at. I'm not so in love with the idea that I took his names for 2025, Mark, and if I put them on a dashboard from Manifest, which I have some faith in, I get a really lousy looking dashboard. So
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
I'm going to say that,
Well, I agree with you 100%. The other one-year contest that is looming large in 3 weeks is the Groundhog Challenge. And I do think I will be influenced by what you're about to see here when I go to make those selections. I'm just trying to keep up with Jim Gallagher. So
he's your hero right now. Okay.
Ken, here's the answer to your question. What about a year that did not have global momentum in the stock market? We had 2 really good years over 20%. 2022, I had forgotten, was actually down nearly 20%. Here are his 10 picks for that year. Excuse me, I'm not certain that 100% certain these were his picks, but this was the list published by Seeking Alpha 3 years ago. So again, the look at the stock market on the lower left was a little bit more painful than I remembered. Maybe I was distracted. And those were his 10 picks, and it actually did pretty well. 11.8 on average versus a market down nearly 20%. So that's just one more scratching of the head, Ken, as far as I'm concerned. I want to see more, but at least it checked out in a non-robust year. All right, so here's what Ken was just mentioning. Here are the 10 stocks for 2025. You can actually go and listen to them at that link that you saw on the website. I do think you have to be a subscriber. I think they probably make that public at some point. I'm not sure about that. But here is the list of companies. A number of those companies are very well known. What's the first thing that jumps out at you, Ken?
Well, I guess PayPal jumps out immediately at me only because Kim has mentioned it so many times in our different sessions, and she's really sold on the concept. I'm thinking to myself that PayPal might be kind of a known story, because every single time I try to analyze PayPal, I get numbers that are in that proof range of 5 to 10% return, nothing exceptional. And I can usually find financial stocks or fintech stocks that offer more opportunity than PayPal offers. I am surprised to see our best small company that's at the top of this list, the Credo up there. It made our best small company, and it is by far doing the best in our contest right now. We always end up with 1 or 2 up near the top that seem to carry the whole list. But we thought that we were taking a gamble on a company that had a lot of prospects based on its story, but had no earnings to back any of it up. And I still think that's the situation for Credo. I still think that if you're going to buy it, that you still have to rely on the sales growth and rely on the story, because there are no earnings to back this company up yet.
Yeah, it's very early stage for sure.
Yeah, the biggest surprise to me on the list, though, Mark, was Brinker. So I can't.
Well,
I can't see a restaurant on a list like this, but maybe.
Well, it's actually done pretty well, and as you know, we've had some groundhog picks and best small company picks that were done pretty well restaurant wise.
I know that they've turned around and bitten us a couple times. So
All right. Well, I'll tell you what I see when I look across the chart. First of all, I see proved numbers that are pretty decent from top to bottom. That last one we'll save for talking about. I included the RSI. That's the traditional RSI 14-day look back. So anything down around 30 is oversold, the way that we look at it. The ACE rating, we don't share very often here. Y-Charts gives this to us continuously, but it literally is what it says down there at the bottom of the page. You're taking whatever number of analysts are covering a certain company and just averaging those ratings. So the one that the analysts like the most among these 10 is Credo. So very interesting. We're going to talk about momentum rank in great detail. The rest of the page I find interesting because of some of the really bizarre numbers and lack of, I guess, correlation would be the right word. In the red circle, Ken, I just find it amazing that the analyst consensus can differ from Morningstar in two sensationally different directions on numbers 2 and 3.
You got it.
I mean, really. It might come down to just so few analysts covering or whatever, but whatever it is, it's huge. And the difference between those two columns is massive. Morningstar's basically looking at most of these, as does Value Line in the next column over, and say, I don't see a whole lot of potential here. The analyst consensus, and maybe we want some of whatever they're having, they actually have pretty high expectations for this collection of companies. All right, and last but not least, again, that side-to-side comparison of those two columns, it just makes my head swim. And last but not least, I think this is kind of a form of momentum or tailwinds or headwinds, however you want to think of it. Right now, the average sales growth from year to year for the standard edition is about 6.6, and most of the companies on this list are higher than that. So that at least that gives you some support. Credo being pretty high up there, and Argan pretty high as far as year over year expectations. So interesting stuff. So one of the things I wanted to point out is when you look down that list and you go to Seeking Alpha, you discover that they look at all these factors, but they clearly were strongly influenced by this concept of momentum. We don't talk about it a lot. We're going to talk about it here for a few minutes. I have no way. I don't know where this will go. I just want to dabble and explore and maybe accidentally learn something along the way. Fair enough, Ken?
Fair enough.
So let's talk about it. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, okay, what's the best way to look at this? And it basically gave us a list of 7 things you can look at. We are very familiar with number 1, the relative strength index. And numbers 2 and 3 are oscillators. They give me a headache, even though I'm a numbers guy, they still give me a headache. I don't see much difference between looking at a price chart and those oscillators. And Ken, you and I have talked about that a number of times. I just don't see the value. I could be wrong. I could be missing something, but for our purposes here, I just want to see, well, what do they think some of these good things are, and how do we think about this whole process? That led to number 4, rate of change as a momentum indicator. That makes a lot of sense to me. So those first two there, number 1 and number 4, are available in our database. So we can do that. The directional index is another one that we don't have at our fingertips. We would have to actually work to provide that one. I'm lazy, so I don't want to do that. I do think this is important, and that's one of the reasons going through the exercise. I think relative strength all by itself can be misleading, and maybe this is a way to refine that a little bit in terms of we want a relative strength index that has perhaps bottomed and the stock price is starting to make the move back in a positive direction. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, commodity channel index, no, just no. Momentum indicator, same type of thing. It's a rate of change, but over a different time frame, and it's precisely what is being used by Seeking Alpha. By the way, we'll show you that. And number 8, Ken, this one's up to you. You get to explain.
Ishimoku, right? Okay, I will.
Ishimoku Cloud. Should we do an entire session on the
I'll get
Ishimoku Cloud
right
in the future?
I'll get right on that. Okay.
I mean, it could be the best thing ever in the history of investing. I'm having trouble seeing it, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. Wow. That's going to take some effort to figure out, and I will do a little bit of reading on it, but wow, that picture just kind of scares me. So again, choosing what works best, again, it depends on who you are, what you're trying to do. You don't have to use it. You can be aware of it. You can learn all about the different things. But I do think for a long-term investor, it's not irrational to combine some form of relative strength comprehension, maybe with some of these other tools. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Am I crazy, Ken?
Uh, the jury's out, Mark. Let's keep going here. Okay.
All right.
Can
So
I answer that one?
no, can somebody mute him in the back room? No, I'm not a technical analyst, not at all, but I do think there are some virtues there somewhere. This is one that we do happen to like a little bit for shopping for opportunities or nudges to do a selling analysis on a stock. So RSI for the stocks that were chosen by Mr. Kress is shown on the left there. And what I'm going to try to do is just simply extract what we can from our database. There's that ACE rating for the companies. And my logic is there on the right. I want to turn this into some form of a buying signal that I can put into some type of a momentum analysis that could potentially make sense. I have no idea where it's going, but using 100 minus RSI instead kind of flips it. So it becomes a buy strength rating. So for right now, probably the strongest one would be PayPal with this RSI of 41, closer to a buy nudge, if you want to think of it that way. It's better than 50% of the companies out there. That's what the relative is, just simply ranking it. So it's at least in the top half when it comes to the buy nudge associated with a relative strength index. So that's the first component, figuring out where the companies rank in that picture. By the way, the fact that these numbers are also low means that these companies have been screaming. Ken, you mentioned Brinker. I believe Chili's was the top performing restaurant venue by a huge margin for 2024. I can't imagine it myself, but it's been a long time since our daughter worked there. But Brinker is firing on quite a few cylinders, and the stock price is reflecting that. All right, so now adding rate of change, the rate of change that's available in our data is a fairly short term one, 12 days. But again, keep in mind that this might be the moderating factor for the RSI to help us understand the companies that not only have an RSI, but have begun to swing back in the right direction. So who's hot lately, and are they perhaps turning the corner? That gets you to a relative rate of change. So the one that's behaving the best in the market up at the top is OPFI of all companies. And then last but not least, stacking in this relative or this momentum score, which is what Seeking Alpha is basically using. It's basically a 52-week rate of change or total return for the companies. So a company that has a high momentum score or ranks very high, as you saw back here in this chart, it simply means that their 1 year total return is among the leaders in the market. That's all it means. And basically taking those components, the buying strength suggested by the relative strength index, the short-term rate of change of the stock price, and the longer term, if you want to call 1 year longer term, and basically adding them together, you get this column. And I don't know quite what context or how to think of it, other than to say these numbers are relatively high in the field of companies. And kind of leave it at that for now. We'll chart some of these and think about them. So let's start with a question. Here's an example. What if I could say, show me a list of 10 companies that are among the momentum leaders, as I just defined it, have a double-digit proof and a quality ranking greater than 90. Might that be useful as I go hunting for groundhog challenge candidates? I'm going to say yes. What do you say, Ken?
I like this list, Mark, but I came up with a similar list, an overlapping list, without doing any of the thought exercises on momentum. So I think there's a couple of different ways to approach this and to get some of these same companies to end up on your radar. Muller keeps popping up no matter how I do screening, as does United Rentals. They both keep popping up on me no matter how I happen to screen. I will admit that that cache, that Pathward Forward, is a new company to my radar. I've never seen that on any screens I've done before, but I'm familiar with a lot of these companies here. Very familiar with the first 4 or 5 of them on there. So I'm not positive that this is a tool that's giving me extra stuff, but I'm willing to listen to the presentation.
Yeah, and the other way I think of it is we often, what if you have 2 companies that are candidates for purchase or inclusion in a contest? They both have similar return forecasts, similar quality, and both are good, and they make us happy. What if one of them had a relative momentum of 95 and the other one was 5? Would I perhaps use that as a tiebreaker? And I don't know the answer to the question, but I think maybe there's tiebreaker potential here. We often use.
Now,
Go ahead.
At the current time, we cannot screen for momentum on manifest. Is that right?
Not yet. Not unless you and I can
Okay.
figure out that it's somewhat useful in some way.
Okay. So where could they access a momentum number? What database could somebody look for? Would you find it in a Morningstar report or in a value line report or something like that? Would you find it somewhere?
I think with finviz.com, you would find virtually all of these. I'm not so sure about this momentum score, which is
Okay.
that 12-month rate of return. But the first 2, I'm pretty sure. You'll find relative strength index and an opportunity to look at some rate of change on FinViz. We'll look deeper into that. Where could they access these numbers? But we have them right now for the manifest database and our tinkering, so we'll do that. So
Okay.
I think it'll be some fun. I find it interesting that Mueller shows up. It's also interesting that my roundtable selection from a month ago is loved by the analysts. So maybe that gives me some ground cover for a while. I'm trying to keep up with Kevin.
No comment.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on, Ken. We are going to take a look at the momentum scores for all of these companies, but let's talk Buttonwood Bulls. All right, so our mission here is, go ahead, Ken.
I'm going to challenge Diageo. I don't think Diageo belongs in the portfolio based on its fundamentals. I'm looking at a sales growth of 6.3%. I'm looking at a par value of that's kind of I know it's double digit, but it's not in the range that we'd like to see it, and it's under the average of the portfolio. But I just don't think Diageo, with that lowest sales growth rate of the entire portfolio, belongs here. I think we can do better. And if your thinking is of the same, then I'll suggest a couple of different stocks that we might consider.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take us to a worksheet in a second, but I'm going to surprise you with something. First of all, that shows you that it's been a tough year. I find it fascinating, by the way, at Robinhood, that with the traditional tool, they don't put any scaling on here. That's a 1-year chart. Just amazing that the numbers are not on there. Anyhow, but here I'm going to surprise you a little bit. We have felt a lack of momentum in a few areas. In other cases, we've had fantastic price movement to the upside, so that the momentum may be dying out a little bit. I'm talking about Lulu. They may be taking a breather based on this metric, and I just look at this, and Diageo's stock price has not gone up that much, and it doesn't have momentum either. Maybe there's more to this than we think yet. So I just kind of throw that out there as this is what the current portfolio looks like.
I'm going to counter with a thought that's come to my head, Mark, that maybe momentum is also quite a backward-looking measure. It's hard to measure momentum for the future when you don't know where it's going. You can measure where it's been, but I'm going to just bring up the idea that Lulu is one of the few companies, let alone apparel companies, but companies period, that has chosen to significantly raise guidance for their numbers going forward. And I wonder if that will affect the momentum numbers as we move for the next couple of weeks. I don't know how short-term some of these numbers are, but I don't think that the raising of guidance has sufficiently worked itself into the market yet for us to see where Lulu is headed. So I would not be in favor of selling Lulu at this moment.
Oh no,
Now,
not even close.
okay, not okay. Then we're together on that. All
Oh
right.
yeah, I'm not suggesting that we think anything different other than this actually points out in fairly stark relief that Lulu's been hot, and it's still judging by the forecast that we use, still looks pretty good. But the stock price has gone up magnificently. It's number one, isn't it, in portfolio? Yeah,
I don't know, but it was
it's over 300.
a fortuitous addition to the portfolio, no doubt about that. Yeah.
And again, in the same time frame, Diageo's stock price has not moved up that much. In fact, it's moved down. And maybe there's something to read in. Again, interpretation is still a bit elusive. I'm drawn to the one at the top also in terms of how it stacks up with a 20% return, still a very high quality rating, and just a pretty good overall look at Green Brick Partners. So what I'm thinking,
Well,
Ken, let's go ahead and go live if you're up for the excitement.
sure. And while you're going live, Mark, before the session started, Matt reminded everybody that the home builders have been really beaten down in the last 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks with interest rates moving in the wrong direction for a lot of the home market, the home buying market. But he did report that D.R. Horton had just presented a wonderful earnings report, and maybe that's coloring where a lot of the other ones are going to come in. I would not be adverse to putting a little bit more cash into Green Brick with its high par and relatively decent sales growth projections.
All right, can you see that okay on your screen? Is it large
I
enough?
think you could maybe make it bigger.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that then, just to get it where it's a little more legible.
Yeah, even one more maybe.
Gonna get you some new glasses.
There, that's good. That's good.
Okay, so there is the.
Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Just calm down over there. All right, so the ones up at the top would be those which would be more vulnerable or receptive to a challenge. The ones at the bottom are where we typically would go shopping for accumulation if we're going to stay within the portfolio. So that's just a way to look at it. Here's what Ken was saying about Diageo being, I just clicked on the growth header to identify Diageo as the slowest growth company in the portfolio. We do want this to be 13, 14, 15-ish for the collective portfolio. So we're in good shape, but we're always striving to improve that. I'm going to switch this to the worksheet. You just simply click on this radial button to the right, click on worksheet. I'm going to reset it because it has, go ahead, Ken.
No, go on, reset it, because you always want to do that to make sure you have a clean worksheet. Yeah. And then the first thing I did, Mark, when I went to this worksheet in the last couple of days, was I made Luminar inactive. And I made it inactive because so many of its numbers influence the averages, I feel, unduly. So with Luminar sitting on the inactive part, I re-looked at the averages.
So can we get permission from Matt to send Luminar into purgatory?
Well, I'm not suggesting we sell it. I'm just suggesting for purposes of playing, we make it inactive for a moment.
I didn't say sell it. I said
Okay.
put it down here in purgatory. It's still down there. It can
Okay.
come back. So this is what if.
All right. And what I'm looking at now, Mark, is the sales growth average. Okay, with Luminar taken out of it, with that 90-something percentage sales growth taken out of it. And the sales growth isn't where I'd like it to be with Luminar gone. I'd like that number to be 13, 13 and a half, 14, without relying on a highly speculative stock to push it in that direction.
Okay.
So that's why I'm really focusing on sales growth an awful lot in this portfolio at the moment.
Wow, you've done this before.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So your candidate for sale is Diageo. So we'll go ahead and send that down here to the inactive. That will bump our cash on hand to, well, we got it in our heads. We have to take out the Luminar. So we've got just over $300.
It's only worth $45. So.
Just calm yourself down. And what were the two companies you wanted?
Well, I'd like to see what happens when you put Mercado Libre on this list.
Okay, we'll put it there without any shares for now. And then the other one you wanted was
United Rentals.
Okay.
You go. Do you know how to make that happen? Press that little plus up in the upper left-hand corner.
For some reason, it wasn't showing up on my screen. I can't figure out why it was. It must have been showing up on yours.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
All right, so now we've got United Rentals and Mercado Libre, just for looking at them in the portfolio. No shares for either one of them, so they aren't contributing anything here yet. But Mercado has a growth rate of 17, 10% here. I guess what I would, and where did United Rentals go? Oh, that's much higher up here.
Not much higher, but maybe 3 up from Mercado Libre.
Okay, I guess what I would, we have studied United Rentals fairly carefully in a few different places. It is due for an update. I do expect this par to come down into the mid-teens with the current value line update. But it looks pretty good to me. I was also going to suggest that with the par this high for Green Brick Partners, maybe we stick another $100 in there and maybe we go with $200 in United.
I can buy that, and I'd like to keep Mercado Libre on the list with 0 shares because I really think it's a great candidate for this portfolio as well. With growth of 17% and a par in double digits, I certainly think it deserves some understanding. You and I have known about Mercado Libre since we were in Minneapolis many years ago when we had to ask your daughter how to pronounce the name of the company.
True.
And I think that it's proven itself. It's the Amazon / PayPal of Latin America. They represent 20 countries, give or take a country, and they're just growing by leaps and bounds. The problem with Mercado Libre is that it's an Argentinian company, which means that you play the currency game a little bit with that company, because the Argentinian peso really moves a lot. It's not as stable a currency as you might have when you're playing with Denmark or United Kingdom or some of the companies that we typically play with, or Canada for that matter. So it gives us a little bit of an extra thing to worry about, but I'd like to leave it on the list with 0 just to not let it bubble under when we forget about what we're doing with the portfolio.
Sure.
And maybe we get to a place where we have a little bit of extra cash and we can throw a couple $100 at it then too.
Yeah, I would be a fan of, perhaps it's not the same type of company exactly, but some people have mentioned one of your old favorites, PriceSmart, and maybe even put that up against Mercado Libre at a future session.
Great idea. Great idea.
Okay,
Yeah.
so for right now, let's go ahead and tuck in a couple more shares of green brick. So we'll be up to, or basically adding $100 to green brick, and you'll see that reflected in the totals down at the bottom. Some of our cash is gone now, and then we want to put $200 into, where'd it go?
United Rentals.
United Rentals, which is trading at 689. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorted by growth again, Mark, and it'll come up near the top, I think.
Okay, so for that one, just 0.29. So again, we're just investing dollars. So a couple $100 into United Rentals, $100 into Green Brick Partners. We will keep Mercado Libre on the list so we don't forget about it. Ken, I
And
have
let's make Luminar active again so that
put it back up there.
well, first of all, let's note that we did change the average from 12.45 to 12.8 in the average prior to Luminar going back in. It was 12.8 if I'm reading it correctly.
Right, and overall we're back with Luminar in there. We are back at about 14%.
At about 14, we've moved up about a 0.5% there, and that's good.
A little more
And
power.
a little bit more par. And where's my par today, Mark?
About 9%.
So we're almost at our +5 then, aren't we?
We are. So with that, I'm going to leave Diageo down here, or should I just blow it away? Let's go ahead and send it into oblivion.
Okay.
So it's gone. You can see that the cash has reflected those two transactions. So we invested approximately $300, and we're all set. I'm going to go ahead and put it back as the original dashboard, which you can
Yep, save
find.
to original. That's the thing that I forget to do so often when I'm playing with a worksheet. Then I come back to it 3 days later and I wonder where it went.
So now you can see that we have made those changes. Again, to summarize, we've made a slight boost in the overall growth rate of the portfolio, got it closer to our target value. Quality's fine. And the projected return is also very close to a very decent target. And by the way, that's a subject for a future meeting. What has the projected return of many of the leading rhino funds, sunk to as a result of some pretty good times in the stock market. So
Yeah.
it's hard to keep
And,
that
and,
par
and
up.
we're sitting with a financial strength above 80, even though Luminar has a 1. So that's pretty decent.
Hey, you can go to the forum and read about how Luminar fared at the Consumer Electronics Show, and
I know, and Mark, I'm still a shareholder of Luminar. Okay,
we are too.
I know how to speculate in a stock like that, and that is to put it away and don't look at it ever. So,
Well, Matt advised us last week that it was up 67% year to date, so that's a nice number. It's better than minus 67, I guess.
I
All
guess
right.
so.
All right, good stuff. So those are two changes we will make. Quick reminder that all of these sessions are recorded and available on YouTube. So simply go to Manifest Investing, search for the bull sessions, roundtables, and then sometimes we have interesting educational sessions. We are going to cover some future topics. I'm just going to skim by them to basically close down for the day with our annual tribute to trading places. We believe this. And not that our goal is to beat professionals, but we would like to invest well and enjoy the success of rewarding long-term investing.
Yeah, Mark, can I make a short announcement? The roundtable for January will be on the 28th of January, the normal last Tuesday date. Our email went out and it references January 28th everywhere in the email. It references Tuesday everywhere in the email, except in one paragraph where the editor didn't catch the Monday reference that we had to make for our last roundtable because of New Year's Eve. So it is Tuesday, the 28th of January. Almost the entire email references Tuesday, the 28th. Just ignore that one reference to Monday, the 28th. There is no 28th on a Monday in January.
Not
More.
this year.
Is it right to here? It is right here. Okay.
Hey, Mark, one other correction. When we were talking about green brick, I'm sorry, my microphone cut out. I don't know if that was a purposeful gremlin or not. When we were talking about green brick, Ken, you mentioned D.R. Horton reporting. They have yet to report. I think it's next week, but it was KB Homes that reported.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I got the wrong home builder that reported. Yep. KB. Okay.
And D.R. Horton is the biggest home builder, so they are a bellwether that way. But I do find, and I listen to KB Homes not just because they're first, but they're particularly generous with their details of their business. For example, it was a KB call at the end of 2022 where they talked about the arbitrage they can do by buying down people's mortgages. They were happy to pay full prices for houses. And so there's some good industry tidbits in there too. And this time it happened to be good news as well. A beat on revenue and earnings.
Great. Mark, we're getting a reminder from Betsy out in our audience, and she'd like you to very, very briefly go over the rules and the deadlines for the Groundhog Challenge, which is coming up in less than a month now. Can you do that real quick?
Yeah, it's about 3 weeks out. There are not a tremendous amount of rules, Betsy. It comes down to submitting between 5 and 20, and I prefer 5 selections between now and then. And just simply by an email or a text or whatever, communicate those selections to me, either entering as an individual or your investment clubs can also enter. We encourage that, obviously, from what you see back here. So it really is just a matter of doing that. We do discourage any stocks below, I think it was $5 this year. So there's a minimum stock price that kept Ardelyx off the list for a while. So really it's just that. We will cover the ground rules in detail during the next bull session. So we'll have a couple of slides, but really it just comes down to rolling up your sleeves, picking some great companies between now and February 2nd. I think February 2nd is it a Sunday this year? It ends up being a Groundhog weekend.
It is.
February, yes, it is. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you.
So this year, our accountants and scorekeepers will get their stack of pizzas and adult beverages and be holed up all weekend long while your entries are coming in for next year as we figure out who won this year, audit the results. So that we will cover that in a little bit more detail in coming weeks. But the simple thing is 5 to 20 selections between now and then.
And I think we should add also, Mark, that if you make 5 selections, that there'll be $200,000 going into each one of them. It's an equal weight on how many you choose. If you make 10 selections, there's $100,000 going into each of them. You can't put $900,000 into one stock and then split the rest of the money between the other 4 if you pick 5. It just doesn't work that way. It's an even split and no changes after you submit the entry.
Unless you want to buy a dinner for the scorekeeper and she a groundhog. No, those are locked in pretty good too. And we're going to try to make a couple of them.
Will hot dogs count?
Hot dogs definitely count. All right. Anything else, Ken?
I think we're in good shape, Mark, and I look forward to our next bull session next Tuesday. And I have about 45 minutes to get ready and get to the McFarland Library for the B.I. Baker meeting now. Okay.
Okay, well, travel safely, and everybody take care out there. Good luck with your groundhog hunting. Take care.
Good afternoon, everybody.